Chapter 4. 4 Friends. We have 4 friends in our hearts waiting to do our bidding. But we also have enemies sitting there waiting to jump out at any given moment. They are never at rest. See Chapter 6. The problem is that we are not diligent enough to throw out the enemies and only cultivate our friends. To cultivate one's friends is a natural and sensible thing to do. Yet there is a lack of clarity in people's minds as to how to judge this in themselves. Our friends are the 4 divine abidings: loving kindness, compassion, joy with others, and equanimity. These have to be searched for in our own hearts. When we find them lacking in ourselves and know this is to our own detriment, we begin doing something about their development. Loving kindness. Words are dangerous. They give an illusion of permanence. We are fed with words, but they are nothing but concepts. They are not real. Imagine a river. The word river can't proclaim the reality of flowing water. The word river is static. The essential quality of a river is that it flows. Loving kindness can never exist unless it flows from the heart. As long as it's just embedded in a word, it is nothing. It is worthless. It doesn't mean anything on its own, in the same way that the word river is only a description that one has to experience in order to know it. If you say to a small child, river, it won't know what you are talking about. But if you put the child's hand in the water and let it feel the flow, then the child knows what a river is, whether it is familiar with the word or not. The same goes for loving kindness. The word is meaningless. Only when you feel it flowing from your own heart will you get an idea what the Buddha talked about in so many discourses. Life cannot be lived fully unless it's lived with both heart and mind. If one lives with one's heart only, one is prone to emotionalism, a very common error, not strictly confined to females, but very much practiced by them. Emotionalism means reacting to everything, and that doesn't work. The mind has its rightful place. One has also to understand what is happening. Yet if one only understands well, one may be intellectually advanced, but the heart is not engaged. Both must go hand in hand, heart and mind together. One has to understand, and one has to use one's emotions positively, emotions that are fulfilling and bring a feeling of peacefulness and harmony to one's own heart. Loving kindness or love, whichever word has meaning for you, is not an emotion resulting from the presence of a lovable person or because one is with one's family or children, or because somebody is worthy of love. That utilitarian and instinctive reaction has nothing to do with this kind of love. Practically everybody can react in that way. It's not very difficult to love one's own children. Most people manage. It is also not terribly difficult to love one's own parents. Some people can't even do that, though most people manage. But that's not the meaning of metta, or loving kindness. When the Buddha talks about loving kindness, he talks about a quality of the heart that makes no distinction between any living being. The highest aspiration mentioned in the loving kindness discourse, see Chapter 8, is that one should love all beings just as a mother loves her only child. Those of you with children know the feeling you have for your children and can tell the difference. How do you feel about your own children, and how do you feel about other people? That is the work one has to do. Unless one is willing to purify oneself until all beings are considered as though one's own children, one hasn't understood loving kindness and its importance. If you see a small child who has fallen off a bicycle and is crying, it will be natural to pick it up and console it. That's loving kindness, but not very difficult. The difficulty lies in generating that feeling in one's heart toward all people, most of whom are not terribly lovable. None of us is perfectly lovable. Only an arahant is. Since we ourselves are not perfectly lovable, why do we expect it of others? Why do we make such distinctions between those we care to love and those we don't love? We think we are justified in not loving those who are not acting in a way we consider proper. Nobody acts in the right way all the time, including each one of us. If you give it a moment's thought, we have all made mistakes in our lives. Even though I don't know your lives, I can be quite sure by looking at my own. Everybody has made mistakes. So why expect others to be perfect if we can't do it ourselves? There are 3 grades, so to speak, of loving kindness. The first one we might call goodwill. We have goodwill toward each other. It is the primary requirement for living together. If we did not have goodwill for each other, we couldn't even meditate together. We would get up and walk about. We would make a noise when everybody was quiet. No country can exist if people don't have goodwill for each other. Have you ever considered how dependent we all are on one another? We are dependent upon the postman to deliver letters, upon the vegetable and fruit seller and the rice farmer for our food, the municipal government for water. We are dependent upon the goodwill of our neighbors, because goodwill is an essential requirement for survival. All manage it most of the time. When it breaks down, we have chaos. The next grade of loving kindness we might call friendship. We feel friendly toward a certain group of people. Our friends, our neighbors, people we know, or someone who does us a favor. Friendliness is a step toward loving kindness, but it isn't real loving kindness yet. It is a quality that is endearing to the heart and endears other people to us. But it has the near enemy of love embedded in it, namely affection. Although we think of affection as something positive, it has attachment in it. Attachment to our friends and associates, to those who help us, to those who live with us. That attachment creates hate, not toward the people we are attached to, but toward the idea that they might be lost. There is fear, and we can only fear what we hate. Therefore, the purity of love is lost. The attachment makes it impure and thus less satisfying. No total fulfillment can be found. This is what happens within the family. That is why there is always unsatisfactoriness in that kind of love. The love one has for one's family can be used as a seedbed to experience the feeling of lovingness. Then one can cultivate it, make it grow, spread it further. Only then does family love have its proper significance. Otherwise, it becomes a hotbed of emotions, as it so often is, like a boiling kettle with the lid on. The loving feeling in the family must be used to cultivate that true feeling of loving kindness in one's heart, which is not dependent on conditions such as my husband, my wife, my daughter, my son, my uncle, my aunt, my mother, my father. That is all my making and mine making. Unless we can transcend that and grow into unconditional love, the family love has not been used for its full purpose. It has been used for ego support and survival instead. Since survival is a lost cause, it doesn't need our effort. Atom bomb or not, we are not going to survive. There is only one place where we are all going to, where we will all meet. Our friendships are beset with the same difficulty, namely attachment. We are attached to our friends. We don't want to lose them. We are nice to them so that they will remain our friends. If they are not equally nice back to us, we immediately consider whether we should remain friends. We want the same friendship back, the same consideration and care. It turns into a commercial enterprise. I give something and I want the same value back. This is what most people do so naturally that we don't even think about it. It happens with our friends, but even more so with our loved ones. If they don't love us back, we feel bereft, desolate, depressed. If they should leave, then love seems to be lost. Isn't it absurd that love should be embedded in one other person, or two, or three? Love cannot be encased in a person. A person is nothing but a bag of bones with 32 parts in it surrounded by skin. See page 53. How can love be embedded in that? Yet that is what the famous tragedies are all about. Romeo and Juliet or Gone with the Wind are dramas about someone leaving, someone not being interested, about separation through death. People are bound to leave, either through death or through changing their mind and their feelings. Whether they ought to or not is not the question. How can love be embedded in one or two such persons? Love is embedded in a feeling. If one hasn't used family love in order to expand and enlarge this feeling, then one is bound to experience a trauma when one's attachment disappears for some reason. The primary purpose of family love is getting to know the loving feeling and then working with it. Working with it isn't confined to a 10-day meditation course or when one chants the loving kindness discourse. Neither mind nor heart can be turned on and off like light switches. They need systematic training with patience and determination. The heart needs training because by nature it isn't constituted to always feel loving kindness. By nature it contains both love and hate. It contains ill will, rejection, resentment, and fear, and also lovingness. But unless we diminish the hate and enlarge the love by doing something about it in our daily life, we have no chance of experiencing that peaceful feeling that loving kindness generates in the heart. Having love in one's heart, unconditional love for others, creates security in the heart. One knows how one is going to react. One can rely on oneself. One is totally reliable, having no fear. One knows that one is trained to the point where there isn't going to be any reaction of hate or anger, not even a little, to mar one's peacefulness. That is the first and foremost great result of having cultivated loving kindness in one's heart. Love is most importantly cultivated when we confront someone who is totally unlovable. That's the time when we can really do the work of changing heart and mind. We are forced to it. Most of us know someone who is difficult to love. We should be grateful for that. In retrospect, it is easy to be grateful. But when we confront that person, all the negative sides arise in the heart. Dislike, hate, justification for our dislike and hate, rationalization, anger. The time to be loving is when all the negative feelings arise. It is the best time for it. It is a great pity to have such an opportunity and not make use of it. If you have nobody unlovable in your life right now, use everybody. Every living being is a learning situation for lovingness, no matter who they are, what they do, what they believe. It doesn't matter what they say, whether they are interested in you or whether they have any loving kindness themselves. None of that counts. The only thing that matters is one's own heart, and that is the one thing to remember. If my heart can become loving and accepting, if I can cause my heart to have no anger, no resentment, then I have taken a great step on the Dhamma path. The Dhamma has to be understood, digested, and lived. Everyone has the opportunity to work on their responses to others. Everybody meets people all the time, and always there are some who do not agree with them. If one clamps one's mouth shut and doesn't say anything, that doesn't create any loving kindness. All it creates is resentment, suppression, worry, or it may result in indifference. None of that is helpful or purifying. The great result of being reliable and secure within oneself can only come when one knows one is going to respond in the fullness of one's heart. The Buddha spoke about 11 benefits that come from loving kindness. The first 3 are: one goes to sleep happily, one dreams no evil dreams, and one wakes happily. If anybody has difficulty falling asleep, you can be sure it is because of a lack of loving kindness, and sleeping pills don't answer this problem. Lovingness does. Then the subconscious also doesn't act in an unpleasant way, so there are no evil dreams, no nightmares, and one wakes with the same feeling that one had on going to bed, namely the same loving thoughts toward all beings as one had the previous day. It's useful to make a balance sheet at night. It can be just in the mind, but it can also be in writing if you are inclined that way. Make a balance sheet. How often have I felt lovingness toward another person today? On the other side of the sheet, put, how often have I felt anger, hurt, resentment, rejection, fear, anxiety today when confronting other people? Then total it up, and if the balance is on the debit side, make a resolution to change it. Every good shopkeeper makes a balance sheet at the end of the day. And if his merchandise doesn't have good customer acceptance, obviously he will change it. It's a skill. It's not an inbred character fault or ability. It's a skill to change oneself again and again until all impurities have been cleansed. It's not because other people are so lovable. They're not. If they were, they'd be roaming around in the God realms. They wouldn't be down here. This is the 5th realm from the bottom in a cosmology of 31 realms. If we are in class 5 from the bottom and 31 exist altogether, well, what can you expect? There is a lot to learn in this realm, and that is its purpose. It is a continual adult education class. That is what this whole human realm is designed for. Not for the purpose of finding some comfort, not in order to have riches, wealth, possessions, not to become famous or to change the world. People have many ideas. Life is strictly an adult education class, and this is the most important lesson, namely to cultivate and make the heart grow. There is no lesson more important. Just as in a garden, when weeds surround a beautiful rose bush. First of all, its nourishment is taken away. It can't flourish. And then nobody can enjoy the flowers or their fragrance. Eventually, the weeds will smother the roses. The same happens within our heart. The rose bush is our lovingness that is growing there. If we don't cut down the weeds and make sure that the flowers can be seen and the fragrance experienced, if we don't get these weeds down to a manageable size, but let them grow and grow, they will eventually smother loving kindness altogether. The weeds are anger and all its associated emotions. Most people are looking for someone to love them. Some people find a few people to love them and then maybe love back. But some people are unfortunate and cannot find anyone. They become bitter and resentful. Yet really, it works exactly the other way around. If we ourselves are loving, then we find innumerable loving people around because everybody wants to be loved. That someone loves us doesn't mean that we are loving. The other person is feeling the love. We don't feel a thing. All we feel is gratification that somebody has found us lovable. That is another ego support to make the ego bigger. But loving others goes in the direction of making the ego smaller. The more love we can extend, the more people we can include in that love, and the more love we have. Whatever we can generate, that much we have within us. It is a very simple equation, but few people see it that way. Everybody is looking for more people to love them. It doesn't work. It's absurd, but we have so many absurdities in our lives. This is in line with another one of our 11 benefits spoken of by the Buddha. One is beloved by humans and by non-humans. If we extend love toward others, they'll feel attracted to us. There will be no scarcity of people to love us. We give them love not because we want to give something, not because they need it, not because they are worthy of it, but because the heart has been trained to do nothing else. It is just like being trained in arithmetic. If a set of figures is put in front of you, you will be able to add them up. What else should you do with them if you want to know their total? Your mind has been trained in that way. If the heart has been trained, it extends love no matter what happens. The Devas protect one. Devas are beings of higher realms, guardian angels. A person who extends love to others is protected. Often people will object. If people are nasty to you and you respond with lovingness, won't they think you're weak and take advantage of you? If they do, which is quite possible because people are inclined that way, that's their bad karma, isn't it? But the person with the lovingness will never lose. How can you lose the love you carry around in your own heart? If somebody takes advantage of you, it is another instance of learning whether your heart has already been trained, whether you have any resentment, or whether you can actually love that person and respond with kindness. It is another instance when we can check whether we're doing the necessary work. Of course, love includes consideration of other people's rights. A person who takes advantage lacks love. The weakness that one may be afraid of showing is a fallacy, because love gives strength, not weakness. A person who has nothing but loving feelings feels safe and secure, totally at ease because nothing can sway them. Love strengthens, not weakens. But if it is coupled with passion, as it is often misunderstood to be, then it weakens one because it has created dependency. If it's a feeling and a cultivation of one's own heart, then it is as strong as a rock. The protection that one gets is a protection through one's own purity. One's mind is quickly concentrated, is another one of the 11 benefits of loving kindness. That's the reason for starting every meditation session with loving thoughts for yourself. The mind cannot concentrate without the 3 foundations of generosity, moral conduct, and loving kindness. These are the 3 pillars of meditation, which support meditation practice. Loving kindness, as a feeling in one's heart, is an absolute essential for concentration because it creates peace and calmness in the mind. If that's lacking, more loving-kindness meditation at the beginning of each session may be helpful in order to cultivate lovingness within yourself. Loving others cannot happen if one doesn't love oneself. But loving oneself does not mean indulging oneself. Always wanting it nice and comfortable, not a single mosquito around, or always the kind of food one is used to, that is indulgence, not love. That's being silly. The love a mother has for her child is permeated with wisdom. If the mother indulges the child is going to pay for it dearly, and so is the mother. But if the mother loves truly, she won't spoil her child. She will bring her child up with love and wisdom and, because of her love, demand adherence to certain standards of behavior. This is what we have to do with ourselves. We have to demand compliance with certain rules of conduct from ourselves because we love ourselves. Coming to a meditation course and sitting through it is loving oneself. The concentration that everybody would like to reach in meditation is truly dependent upon lovingness in the heart. It is also dependent upon practice. But if practice is lacking, loving kindness can take its place in making concentration happen. One has a shiny complexion. This means one has a pleasant expression on one's face. It's a far better beauty aid than anything one can buy at the chemist's. That's where real beauty comes from. And if one wants to be reborn beautiful, this is the ingredient. A young person may look beautiful without having much inside, but one can often see the real beauty of a person by observing them. The Buddha was often described as making such an impression on people just by walking along the street that they followed him and became his disciples after only seeing him once. In one instance, Rahula, his son, became proud about looking beautiful like his father. The Buddha immediately reproved him and said, "All forms should be regarded thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is substanceless." Another of the 11 benefits is that fire, poison, and arrows won't hurt one. People don't shoot arrows much these days, but they do use guns or clubs. Fire and poison are still used for aggression. This doesn't necessarily mean that one is invincible, but it does mean that persons with a great deal of lovingness don't usually find themselves in situations such as that. But if they do, their heart is not affected. Their possessions maybe, but not their heart. One is invincible in the heart because one is no longer able to hate. One dies an unconfused death. We are all going to die. The moment of death is important because it is the moment of rebirth. It's actually our birthday. Everybody talks about death as something sad and filled with grief. If death is experienced consciously, with awareness and full loving kindness, then it is a good birthday. That's all it really is unless one is an arhat. Our habitual way of thinking and feeling will be with us at the end of life, at the moment of death. The habitual thinking pattern cannot be changed suddenly. If it has been one of loving kindness, there will be awareness, no fear, peace, and security in the heart. The instant of death needs to be a profitable moment because it's the start of a whole new lifetime again. Loving kindness can be cultivated in the heart with great benefit to ourselves. Someone once said, quite rightly, "That's an ego trip." It is. As long as we have an ego, every trip we're on is an ego trip. But at least this is one trip in the right direction. This journey goes toward the ultimate destination, egolessness. Because the more loving kindness there is in the heart, the less ego. The more the ego diminishes, the more love can come from the heart. When other people are taken into the heart, the self has to step aside to make room. Others are benefiting by that as a matter of course, but that is a secondary consideration. The only person we can lead to liberation is ourself. Everybody has to go alone, solitarily. Anybody who would like to come along is welcome. The bandwagon is big, and there aren't enough people on it yet. Compassion. Our second friend is compassion. Its far enemy is cruelty. Its near enemy is pity. Pity is called a near enemy because it seems so similar. It is very close, and yet it is an enemy. Pity arises when we are sorry for someone. Compassion is when we are sorry with someone. Com means with, passion is strong feeling. Compassion is empathy, to feel with another person. Compassion arises when one realizes the suffering, the unsatisfactoriness that exists within oneself. Only then can one feel with another person. Otherwise, one is still under the delusion that everything is all right with oneself, that it's only other people who are having a bad time. If one sees clearly within oneself all the unsatisfactory states that arise constantly in quick succession, the likes and dislikes, the regrets and the resentments, the fears and the worries, the tensions, then one knows that everyone is subject to the same. Then when someone else is having a difficult time, one can feel with that person because one knows about one's own problems. Compassion can be an excellent starting point for love. If one can arouse in oneself a genuine feeling for another person, realizing how difficult the situation must be for them, what may be happening, then from there it's not such a far cry to having a feeling of lovingness toward that person. But again, we mustn't discriminate between people, and that is what mostly happens. We can usually feel some compassion for those with whom we have some affinity. They belong to the same group, or to the same religion, the same country, the same neighborhood, or the same club, whatever it is that we are interested in. Something that we can call mine, which makes it selective. That selection is what separates us from each other, and wherever one goes in the world, this separation exists. This creates all the strife between people. The separation from each other is based on our ego concept. This is me, and I've got to protect me and defend me. Me feels threatened. Me feels threatened so often that one doesn't even know me very well. One doesn't know who that me really is. All one is aware of is the threat to me, with its attendant fear. When there is fear, there is no compassion, because fear is based on hate. We only fear what we don't like. We don't fear what we love. The more fear there is in the heart, the less compassion. Fear is always based on the ego concept. An arahant is totally fearless. There is no fear in a person who's enlightened. There is nothing to fear because there's nothing to gain and nothing to lose. It has all become immaterial, without significance. The more ego, the more fear. Fear of the dark, fear of thieves, fear of bad weather, fear of the future, all kinds of fear. Fear is always based on the protection of that illusory me. And the more we want to protect me, the less we can have compassion. Compassion can, of course, be lip service. We can pretend. Most of us are extremely good at pretending. Once Pesa, an elephant trainer's son, came to see the Buddha and said to him, "I have no problems with elephants. They do exactly as they appear to want to do. They have an intention, and I can see that intention, and then they follow through with it. But I have a lot of problems with people. They say one thing and do another." The Buddha said, "That's right. The elephant lives in the jungle, but the human being lives in a mental jungle. People say one thing and mean or do another. The worst of it is that we're not even aware of it. We think that is the way it ought to be done. We think that this is convention, custom, or tradition, and we don't thoroughly examine our thoughts, speech, or actions. Only when we examine ourselves with ruthless honesty will we ever know what the Buddha taught. The Buddha talked in depth about what happens with each one of us. Superficially, we all look different and seem to have different ideas and intentions. Superficially, there seems to be a great difference between people. But underlying it all, there is a unity. We all are made from the same recipe, and we are all searching for the same thing and going to the same destination. The differences we find are arbitrary. They are all based on the ego concept. Every thinking person bemoans the fact that there is no peace between nations. Everybody would like to see peace on this globe. Obviously, there isn't any. In this century, there has been a war somewhere practically all the time. Every country has an enormous defense system that uses a lot of energy, money, and manpower. This defense system is turned into an attack system the minute anyone makes even the slightest unfriendly remark or seems to be moving toward an invasion of airspace or of territorial waters. This is rationalized and justified with, "We have to defend the border of our country in order to protect the inhabitants." Disarmament is a hope and a prayer, but not a reality. And why? Because disarmament has to start in everyone's heart, or wholesale disarmament will never happen. The defense and attack that happens on a large scale happens constantly with us personally. We're constantly defending our self-image. If somebody should look at us sideways, or not appreciate or love us enough, or even blame us, that defense turns into an attack. The rationale is that we have to defend this person, this country that is me, in order to protect the inhabitant, self. Because almost every person in the world does that, all nations act accordingly. There is no hope that this will ever change unless every single person changes. Therefore, it is up to each of us to work for peace inside ourselves. That can happen if each ego is diminished somewhat. And ego only diminishes when we see with ruthless honesty what's going on inside us. Labeling thoughts is one way of doing that. One finally finds out what kind of rubbish one is thinking, and one has fewer grandiose ideas about one's person and one's thinking capacity. It is one of the aspects of meditation. Another aspect of ruthless honesty with oneself is to admit when one has unpleasant feelings and cannot handle them. One recognizes that one is constantly in search of sensual gratification. That ruthless honesty makes it possible to diminish the ego a little. When one does that, compassion becomes a possibility. Real compassion, not just the word. The words are facile. They are available to anybody who can talk. Small children from the age of 6 upward can repeat the loving-kindness discourse, page 87. It all sounds very nice, but what does it do? The repetition of these words cannot possibly bring about a feeling, yet we live according to our feelings. That's why it's so essential to know our own feelings. We believe we live according to our thinking, but we don't. First comes the feeling, and then comes the reaction. Then the thinking process justifies the reaction. Understanding our feelings is of the utmost importance. It's of the essence. How can we ever know what it means to love or what it means to have compassion if we don't feel them? We may know about them, but how can we ever actualize them if we don't feel them? Liberation is not knowing, it is feeling. Everybody feels a me. Everybody knows his or her name. But everybody also feels that the name describes this special me. One can feel the self. So in order to get to non-self, non-self has to be felt too. Compassion is a feeling in the heart and does not need special reasons or special conditions. It can be totally unconditional. We don't have to wait for special occasions to arise, namely that someone is beset by tragedy or their body gives them great pain. If we have to wait for those to arouse compassion in ourselves, it is going to be an on and off affair, probably more off than on. That's not a compassionate heart. A compassionate heart, just like a loving heart, feels compassion all the time because everybody has suffering. It's embedded in the first noble truth of the Buddhist teaching. There is nobody without it, because life, existence, is suffering. This doesn't mean tragedy. It means that all that happens contains friction and irritation and a constant wish for more, or for remaining so, or for becoming different. Total equanimity is not the lot of human beings, other than arahants. Compassion is called for at all times, not only when tragedies have befallen people. This feeling for others is only possible with a diminished ego. Ego concern is at the root of the problems people have with each other. Because everybody has the same ego concern, nobody can really feel for another person. Anybody who does stands out as somebody special. a sad and absurd state of affairs, because compassion and loving kindness in the heart make the one who has them happy. Yet most people are lacking them. There's very little real happiness to be found anywhere. Yet these two feelings in the heart are sources of joy, because they diminish the ego. Anyone who is only ego-centered has little joyfulness, because there is no satisfaction to be had in ego gratification. We can never get to the end of our problems. There's always a new one arising. But when one lets go of that and directs one's attention to the all-prevailing unsatisfactoriness to which every living being is subject, not only can one see the universality of it, but also that one's own particular suffering has no real significance. It's part of the whole of existence. Then compassion for oneself and all beings arises, and determination to make an end to all suffering gains the strength it needs to succeed. Sympathetic joy. The next of our four friends is joy with others, or sympathetic joy. The far enemy of it is envy, which is easy to see. The near enemy is affectation or hypocrisy, saying one thing and meaning another. For example, if someone has good fortune and one feels obliged to offer congratulations, using just the words but not feeling anything, or worse, using the words and thinking the opposite, something like, "Why isn't it happening to me? Why always to someone else?" Joy with others is a sure antidote for depression. Anybody who suffers from depression is suffering from the lack of joy with others, the lack of sympathetic joy. One cannot always have joyful occasions, joyful thoughts in one's own life, but if one has joy with other people, one can surely find something to be happy about. One can also have joy with other people's abilities. Most people find it extremely difficult to admit that someone else is very capable. Reluctantly, one sometimes says, "Well, he can do that, but..." And immediately a detraction follows instead of joy with the other person who can do something better than oneself. There are so many things other people can do better than ourselves. Some can sing and some can paint. Some can dance and some can translate. Some can make money and some can live without. Everybody has some ability. One can find innumerable occasions for being joyful. Joy with others is also good karma making. I was in a little village once where there was a special bell attached to the temple. Whenever anyone in that village had some good fortune, they would go and ring that bell. If the harvest was brought in, or the daughter got married, if someone came back from the hospital, or a good business deal had been arranged, if the roof had been reshingled, anything at all that gave them joy. When the bell was rung, everybody would come out, look in the direction of the person who was ringing the bell, and say, "Well done, well done." The one who was ringing the bell was making good karma by making it possible for the others to share his joy. The others were making good karma by sharing another's joy. Most villages, towns, and cities don't have special bells for that purpose. We have to ring our own bell. This is something of the utmost importance to remember what the Buddha taught under all circumstances, and to actually follow through with it. Not just to remember it on special occasions or when tragedy strikes, but to remember it at all times because it is the recipe for happy and peaceful living. The Buddha said, "There is only one thing I teach, and that is suffering and its end to reach." He made a gigantic promise, and he kept that promise. That's what he teaches, the end of suffering. Unless we remember that ego is at the bottom of the whole problem and try to do something about it, we have forgotten his teachings. They are not an occasional benefit. They need to be inside the heart and mind all the time. Equanimity. The last of our four friends is the crowning glory of all emotions. Equanimity, even-mindedness. Its far enemy is anxiety and restlessness, but its near enemy is indifference, and the two are easily confused. Indifference is a state of mind that says, I don't care as long as it doesn't happen to me or my family. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to get upset. Indifference is cold, rejecting. It has no love in it, no loving kindness. We just want to protect ourselves, and to accomplish that, we become disinterested. But even-mindedness is based on the wisdom and the insight that everything changes, on an understanding of total impermanence. No matter what happens, it will all come to an end. Whatever may be, it doesn't have any real significance. The door to the deathless, through impermanence, is the signless door, which means no significance. There is nothing in the whole of the universe that is really significant except liberation. So, equanimity derives from the insight that everything constantly changes. Whether what has happened feels good or bad is neither a cause for elation nor for depression. It's just happening. We are here as this specific human being for maybe 60, 70, 80 years. So what's all the hustle and bustle about? What is there to gain? Where is there to go? It's all just happening. The only reason we have no true equanimity is because of ego protection. We fear that I may be in some sort of danger, some sort of attack on me, which may make my life less secure. The security that everyone is looking for is a myth anyway. It is an illusion. There is no security. Everybody is subject to death. Everything we have is subject to destruction. Everyone we love is subject to death, decay, disease, disappearance, changing his or her mind. There is no security in any of that. The lack of equanimity that arises when things happen that we don't like is based on the illusion that we've lost something that is really significant to our well-being. This is our ego protection. But even our well-being is an illusion because there is nothing that can ever make us truly well and lastingly secure. Equanimity needs more than just the determination to be even-minded. Determination is useful, but it can easily be based on suppression. We tend to suppress our strong emotions. That doesn't benefit us at all, because they come out eventually. What we suppress in one way finds different outlets. Suppression can result in sickness or in depression. It can show itself in other upheavals. We are not upset by one particular situation, but by another one. Equanimity needs insight. When it is perfectly cultivated, it is one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. Complete equanimity is a privilege reserved for the enlightened ones. Yet unless we practice it now, how will we advance and grow? Through meditation, we can begin to see the flux and the flow, how the mind changes constantly. Can anybody remember what they were thinking about 10 minutes ago? In the last meditation? In the one before that? Nobody. We can't keep any thought. We can't keep anything. Everything is momentary. Just because we may have had a house or a person around us for the past 30 years doesn't mean we can keep them. Because they have been with us for a long time, they appear to be permanent. But we can easily notice in our meditation how our thoughts come and go and never stay with us. What is there to get worried about if everything moves, everything disappears? Constant flux, constant flow. Only so long as this is happening is there a human being. So long as the breath is moving, the blood pulsating, the thoughts and feelings changing, so long as all the cells in the body are decaying, just so long do we have a human being. When that stops, we have a corpse. Without that flux and flow, we wouldn't be here, and yet we try to make that flux and flow permanent. We try to make it solid. This is me, and I want to make sure that everybody knows this is me. I've got a name, and there are certain people and possessions that belong to me. I've got viewpoints and want to make sure everybody knows them. This is trying to instill permanency into a person. Yet there can only be a person because that person is constantly changing. And in the end, it's going to change into a corpse. Then we can start all over again. Equanimity will have to be imbued with some basic insights in order to arise. It also has to contain acceptance. So long as there is no acceptance, there is suffering because this implies resistance. The opposite of acceptance is resistance, and resistance hurts. If one pushes against something, it hurts one's hand. If one goes along with it, there is no pain at all. Acceptance of things the way they are creates equanimity, and equanimity creates security in the heart. These four emotional states, the divine abidings, create security in the heart. If one cultivates the four friends to some extent, one will feel secure, at peace, and at ease, because one realizes that the world may condemn and abuse, but one doesn't have to take part in all that. The Buddha said, "I don't quarrel with the world quarrels with me." That is the security of equanimity.